Earth, 2944. Everyone in the enclosed capsule stood and stared at the destroyed mess of the alien-like creature. The single blast from Weber's shotgun had blown it apart, leaving nothing but unidentifiable pieces scattered around the table and sprayed up the walls beyond it. No one uttered a word as they all tried to understand what Annie had just said. Dr. David Anderson spoke first, his voice slow and steady as his mouth tried to interpret what his racing brain was thinking. "Annie," he said, his forehead so furrowed that his eyebrows damn near met in the middle, "I think I understand a little about how hive queens communicate. They use smell, touch, and so on to control their subjects. If this thing," he waved his hands toward the remnants that lay before them, "sent out a signal, then it must be man-made. It'd need a transmitter and a power source. I don't know a lot, but I know computers, and I'm not seeing anything man-made about this." "What are you trying to say, Dr. Anderson?" Annie asked formally. "I'm saying, can you run whatever test you ran again? I'm sorry, but what you're saying isn't possible." The pause before Annie spoke was longer than usual. When she replied, her voice bordered on angry. Everyone was getting used to the self-evolved changes Annie had made to her programming during her almost 1,000 years of solitude, but anger was a new emotion they hadn't yet heard from her. Everyone was taken aback, especially her creator, who had nurtured her since inception and worked every day for over a decade writing the uncountable millions of lines of code that had given birth to her. "Dr. Anderson, I won't waste any of my memory rerunning tests when I know what the results will be. The creature on the table emitted a signal just before Mr. Weber killed it. Before you had recovered from the shock of the gun being discharged, I had analyzed the signal many times, discovered the source, and proved beyond doubt to myself that the signal was in my code." Silence. "Now, if you would afford me the courtesy of allowing me to calculate without interruption, I will come up with some suggestions." Without another word, she emitted the dull down tone that indicated she was offline. Anderson stood with a bemused look on his face, which he cast at the others in search of support. The unearthly-looking remains of the wirelessly connected bug in front of him all but forgotten as he thought about the new personality traits that his creation kept showing. He had just been told off by a computer program, one that should by rights only be able to respond to a sequence of events that triggered the appropriate response painstakingly programmed line by line. Annie had, without any input apart from her own programming, rewritten her own code to, in her own words, streamline the process. She had become, in effect, self-aware, able to think for herself, make decisions, and understand the consequences. At least, she thought so. But humans learned how to do that over many years of learning cause and effect under guidance from people who had done it all before. It was her emotions that intrigued Anderson the most, or at least the simulation of emotions in her interactions. She could laugh at events, sound excited as she whispered conspiratorially to him, and now show anger at having her assessments questioned and her time wasted. He decided he needed to sit down with Annie so he could work out if they were programmed responses or if she, as he unbelievably expected, had evolved even more as an individual entity. Anderson was, as most in his profession were, a full-on, dyed-in-the-wool geek, a first-class nerd. Back on the old Earth, if he ever went out, he'd go to cons where people dressed up like characters from Star Trek. He and Annie had lived most of the last decade of their lives pretty much alone, locked away in artificially lit rooms with a bank of computer screens, a keyboard, and mountains of hardware as their only companions. Science fiction, be it in films, books, or online gaming, became his only other distraction, and even that fell away as his work was more consuming than everything else in the world. Normal people just didn't get people like him, so as with most other similar people, they retreated into their electronic worlds, fed by a bad diet, and only found escape through science fiction, which he felt was his responsibility to make science fact. The notion of a self-aware computer immediately, as it would with most who grew up in the latter decades of the 20th century, conjured up terrifying images of genocidal robots seizing control of the world's nuclear arsenal and eradicating humanity as the biggest threat to life on the planet. Would he be the one, if circumstances dictated, attempting to unplug Annie? Would she defend herself? How would she do it?
Para seguir escuchando este audiolibro gratuitamente, haz clic en el enlace de la descripción y podrás escucharlo completo sin coste gracias a la prueba de 30 días de Audible.